Our next guest writes for golfchannel.com and is here to talk about all things FedEx playoffs, as well as the LIV Tour and the ongoing beef now with the PGA Tour. Let's welcome to the show Mr. Rex Hoggard from golfchannel.com. Welcome to the show, Rex. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
You bet. All right. So, of course, the big news surrounding the LIV Tour was the injunction that 3 players were looking for so they could play in this year's FedEx playoffs. Yesterday, the ruling came down that said no go. Can you fill us in a little bit more on that info and why you think the judge ruled in the way the judge ruled?
I've covered a lot of these cases, especially covering the PGA Tour over the last few years, and most of these hearings are so boring and dry and just filled with legal ease where you just kind of get lost in the minutia and the weeds. This was a 2-hour hearing yesterday, and I was in the courthouse in San Jose, and I was riveted. I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd. I will own that, but it was really fascinating conversation because it essentially had taken everything that we had read in all of the filings and the lawsuits and the countersuits and everything and put it on a stage, so to speak. It put emotion behind these words, and I thought that the judge did a very good job of taking a complicated issue and keeping it as simple as possible. And whether or not, if you agree with the ruling or not, I think what she looked at in this particular case is, and then this is always going to be the standard when you're trying to get a temporary restraining order, is harm. Can you prove that there would be harm if these players weren't allowed to play in this event? And based on the contract, which they were allowed to see, the public wasn't, but the judge and the lawyers were, that these players signed with LIV Golf, they weren't able to prove harm.
Yeah, I mean, that was the biggest takeaway that I got to, was that the amount of money that was being paid showcased that them missing these tournaments was not going to affect them negatively. This is really interesting me. Now, I understand fully the backing of how this started, of course. You know, it's backed by Saudi money, and that's the understanding in a lot of ways people look at it. Now, if you choose to look at it that way, I'm all for it. But I've had a tough time rationalizing why the PGA Tour has become so resentful of it, right? I mean, I know they feel like they're being having some of their best players plucked away because of things like that, but it's I haven't quite understood why the PGA Tour has gotten their feathers ruffled so much around another competing golf tour, right? Something that just it has never existed outside of the PGA Tour, and for a different option where guys have a chance to make more money. Why has it been so controversial? Has it been because of who's backed it in terms of that, or has it simply been because some players weren't willing to do it, and have been open and honest about how they feel about it?
I think it has some to do with who's behind the money behind it. The tour has tried to make this a moral conversation, a moral argument, and that's worked in some circles and it hasn't worked in others. And, you know, I leave it kind of up to the individual. We all know Saudi Arabia, and you can make your own choices about what blood money is or sports washing or anything else that goes into this. I think the real emotions come from the idea that it's such an irrational threat. Commissioner Jay Monahan talked about this just a few weeks ago, and he said point blank and very bluntly that if this is a battle that's only being fought with dollar bills, the tour cannot compete, which is astonishing to me because the tour just signed very, very lucrative new TV deals with all of its partners. And for him to sit there and say that we're flush, and yet that's not even enough money to compete, I think that's where the emotion comes from. When you realize that you're up against an opponent who can do things that you cannot. If this turns into a bidding war, it's a war the tour is going to lose. Now, I'll also say on the flip side that by and large, that the players in this whole saga have been pretty understanding. When Dustin Johnson decided to leave and he announced, I think most players said, you know, we're going to miss him, or we wish he wouldn't do it, but he can make his own choices. It became very, very personal last week when this lawsuit was filed. And I think you saw a lot of players who were remaining loyal to the PGA Tour suddenly push back, because suddenly it wasn't sort of this abstract threat. They weren't suing the tour. They were suing all of the members, and that landed hard.
Yeah, I can understand that. One of the things I had trouble with, specifically some of the people who spoke out, and because they're such huge names, they got a lot of news, right? We hear Rory McIlroy a ton, and we hear Tiger Woods talk about they can't understand why someone would leave a tour that gave them everything to go somewhere else. I don't know if those two are the best to make the argument simply because both of those individuals have the generational wealth that is being presented to the likes of Dustin Johnson and Pat Perez and others that they're stepping towards. I don't know if those guys were the right voices, even though people have wanted to hear from them because of that aspect of things.
There's an element to that where absolutely. I mean, we've heard sort of the obscene report that Tiger Woods was offered, I don't know, $500 million or $700 million or whatever number you choose to believe, which is an astronomical figure. However, we're talking about Tiger Woods. To your point, the generational wealth is still there. You can say the same thing for Rory and JT and Jordan Spieth to a certain example. And the flip side of that I have argued is I actually did an interview with a player named Richard Bland. He's an Englishman. He's 49 years old, and it was earlier this year in Texas. And I asked him why. He'd already announced that he was going to live. And he explained very well that he's 49 years old, and in his career, he had made $2.5 million. And he asked me to do the math. Like, all right, I've been playing for 25 years, so you do the math on what I've made over the course of my career. Of course, I'm going to take this opportunity. That's why I said when this was an abstract threat for the players, I think by and large, most of them understood. This was about money, and this was about whatever individual challenges you have. You have to take care of your family. You have to pay the mortgage, whatever the case may be. It really didn't become personal until last week because, and this phrase has gotten weaponized, and I'm not even quite sure what it means, but it's have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
They don't. The players suddenly have a hard time with that one. You're not going to be able to play both of them. I think is why this sort of degenerated to where we're at right now.
Joining us here on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line, Rex Hoggard from golfchannel.com, senior writer. Yesterday, there were some rumors and some talk, and it has been going on for a little while, around Cam Smith, right, the British Open champion, and the possibility of him moving on to the tour as well after the PGA FedEx playoffs. What are you hearing about that? And is there if there's smoke, is there fire type of scenario with this?
I mean, I think the rumors have been pretty rampant, and what LIV Golf has done, and they've been pretty successful in this, is just sort of letting these players bleed out one by one by one, and it's just paper cuts. I mean, they just continue to take shots at the tour week in and week out, even in the middle of the playoffs. In this particular case, Cameron Smith has been rumored to be going to LIV Golf even before he won the Open Championship, so I don't think there's any surprise there. I guess the only thing that I can say escalated sort of yesterday, and probably a little bit at St. Andrews after he won, is instead of doing the things that the other players did, which they didn't admit they were going to LIV Golf, but they said all the keywords, right? Like they had the talking points down. I want to compete against the best players in the world, and I have to do what's best for my family. That was all code for, yes, I'm going to LIV Golf. Instead, Cam Smith has decided to sort of draw a much harder line, and I don't understand it. I understand that you want to play the playoffs and you want to win the playoffs, and I don't think anybody's got a problem with that, but I think he needs to be a little bit more forthright in a lot of people's minds. Yeah,
transparency is a fickle thing within individuals who are making a decision that seems very controversial in the eyes of a lot of people. All right, well, let's get into the real deal then. The FedEx playoffs start this week. It's been an intriguing PGA Tour season. We head to the final three. Where are we at right now? Scotty Scheffler still at the top of the list. Where are we looking as we come down the stretch? Tony Finau, after a couple with a back-to-back win a few weeks ago. Where are we at now with the playoffs ramping up?
I took the red eye from San Jose, where the court hearing was yesterday, to Memphis, and I kind of started to try to get back into golf mode because this has been, LIV Golf had been consuming you, and all the things you just pointed out sort of struck me on the plane last night. That it's been a really cool season where Scotty Scheffler has had a career year. Cameron Smith has certainly had a career year. The one that really stands out to me, and I wish I could have gotten here on time for his press conference, was Rory, because he's coming off what had to be a heartbreaking finish at the Open Championship, although I don't know how he really went away from that. Because I saw a stat a few weeks ago that said I think it's 6 players that made the cut in all 4 major championships this year. Rory was at the top of the heap at a total of 29 under par. The next closest was Cam Smith at 21 under par. By any definition, Rory has had an unbelievable successful season, and yet I think still in his heart of hearts, he's thinking he still has something to prove, and he's won a FedEx Cup. He knows how to do this, so I would keep my eye on him. And certainly Cam Smith seems motivated for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Exciting times. switch and change in the order of the majors, right? Moving the PGA Championship up, it ends the season of golf in terms of majors earlier than what we're used to. And I know this has happened over the last few years, but is the FedEx Cup trying to become that major that ultimately gets people excited and back at it later in the year since they've made those types of moves?
I think so. Sure. I think when the PGA Championship moved to earlier in the season, and I mean, this was done for a lot of different reasons, primarily to try to get out of the shadow that football throws over every sport. So there's no reason for golf to try to compete with football because you're not going to win that battle. But in this particular case, I don't know that they're ever going to be considered majors, although I would make the argument that a FedEx Cup championship, beyond the money, I mean, the winner gets $18 million, beyond the money, has started to reach a level of prestige that's not major-like, but it's the next level down. And I would also argue that if you look at how the playoffs have sort of evolved over the years, it used to be 4 events, and the points were different, and the way they did the Tour Championship was different. And I still don't know if they have the formula, right? Like, I'm not smart enough to figure out the math on that. But I would argue that it gets people to pay attention to golf. Our best players are playing during a time of year when they traditionally have not been playing, and they're playing for a significant prize. I think that's a win for the Tour.
Rex Hoggard, everybody, golfchannel.com senior writer, joining us. Thanks for taking the time, Rex. Really appreciate the info.
Thanks for having me on.